For some, the word data and its connotations often elicit fear, confusion, and suspicion, and there are good reasons for that, aren't there? Striking the balance between data collection, data protection, security, stakeholder needs, and public safety is a key challenge in society as we move forward. Reconciling those issues requires an answer to the following question: how can data be collected ethically? And it's a thorny question at that. So to discuss this, we've got one of the world's leading proxy service and data collection companies, Bright Data, formerly Luminati Networks, alongside the co-founder and CEO of R2 Labs, Anish Mohammed, and identity and privacy advocate, Phil Booth. It's moderated by the WEDF's strategy officer, Kristina Pakhomchik. They'll explore ethical approaches to data collection.
Hello and welcome. Thank you, Jeff, for a wonderful introduction. Without a further ado, let's jump straight into this. There is a lot of misunderstanding about online data collection and a lot of speculation about its ethical and legal status. So let's start with a quick round of how you understand the issues. Anish, could I ask you to start? Where do you stand on this? You have a highly technical background, but at a relatively high level, could you explain a little about data collection and how you perceive it?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably, hand wave and say the book, The Surveillance Capitalism, is a very good place for uninitiated to understand the current state. I mean, the start of the current state of data collection. So pretty much FANG, as in like Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, Google, they are all running machine learning algorithms and converting this data collection into an arbitrage where they optimize some economic function, and they're using this data collection as their value. Essentially, what that means is like, if Amazon, Facebook, Google, and everybody else is worth a few trillion, that is all the data of the people that's on the internet that accidentally or indirectly ended up using their tool, and their data being being collected and used by them.
Thank you. Or what about you? As an industry professional, I'm sure you can tell us a lot about online data collection. Does what Anish has said seem right to you?
Yeah, so from my point of view, I'm more looking on data collection of publicly available information. So less about the data that is being out there produced by the individuals, and more about the data that is being out there that anyone can view with their own laptop or mobile phone. But if you want to collect it in scale, then you just can't do that. Okay, so the situation today is a bit of even an absurd, that I can just open my browser and go to see a product page, for example, just to see the price. And if I want to do it as a business or as an organization, as a research group from a university, and I want to do it in large scale, just to gather all this information to be able to execute my research, for example, and get into conclusions, I'll get blocked and I can't collect this data. And I mean, where's the transparency? So I think that this is the bigger issue, or just a different issue, because everyone are talking about private data and privacy issues, which is fine, we can talk about it. But what I'm trying to raise that issue is about the problem to collect the data that is publicly out there, but it's not really public.
Thank you. Or Phil, would you like to add to this and state your position on online data collection and what it is?
Sure. Well, obviously, as a human rights advocate, privacy advocate, my concern tends to be focused on personal data. So in a way, like Anish has covered the overall collection of data and very elegantly laid out how the economics of that, and always focused in on a particular sort of use case, something which I know of as data scraping, another word. Maybe people who've done research or tried to get information. For example, we often have to get stuff from government websites, and it's not put in a convenient form. So you have to use some sort of way to extract, the published data, but put into a more usable form. So I guess my questions would be around, or my thoughts on data collection, data scraping would be precisely what data is being collected, for what purposes, and what is being done with it, and ultimately, who benefits and in what way. Collection is a process, and as Anish has pointed out, it's a massively underlying, some of these very large business models. My focus would be much more specific and looking at the impacts on people or companies, and how their rights have been attended to.
Thank you. So following up on this, before we get to the main question, whether data collection can be ethical, what do you see to be the main ethical concerns? Or would you like to start on this?
I think that when trying to answer this question, immediately when you talk about data, private data, but also public data, or if Phil talked about scraping or data collection, what comes to mind is it okay to do it? And I think that this is where the problem starts, when it's still not obvious to everyone, to the industry, that it's okay to do it. You just need to do the right way, right? There are rules, there is regulation, there are standards. So I think it starts there, that it's still for most of the, I guess, also attendees that are watching us, it's still not clear if it's okay or not. I think that this is where the problem starts. Anish.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to make something very clear. I mean, Phil kind of alluded to it already. I think most people don't recognize the social structures we currently have. Those assume privacy is offered, okay? If I use normal money, it provides me with privacy, okay? Really, like, nobody really checks my serial number unless I'm doing something funny, right? And, there's like I kind of started at a very high level where I kind of described the major economic drivers that's happening. But at a lower level, at a personal level, what I do, how I do, and what my choices are, when they're being understood, the Cambridge Analyticas of the world happen. And that really impacts humanity globally, both at the governance level, and if you go to more how could I say, authoritative regimes, threat of life, threat of freedom, the freedom of movement. So this is like a big problem that actually needs to be looked at in very different perspective, not just, I mean, I completely agree with Or's, kind of pointing out to the fact that, the key players want to keep their competitive moat. Essentially, if you have read the paper by Google guys, The Unusual Effectiveness of Data, there are three things that you require. Number one is humans to create the model. Number two is hardware. And number three is data. And data is the key. And what they're trying to do, and which is what Or is kind of referred to, is the fact that they're trying to prevent anybody from entering the space. The fangs of the space got to the chessboard of data privacy game. They took the top, the center 8 chessboard pieces, prevent anybody from entering. That's what they're trying to do. The problem is worse. It's a multi-dimensional chessboard. And essentially what is happening is they are spreading from where they are into other spaces and literally preventing you and me as individuals, as humans, having the choice. They're optimizing the constraints for us and literally turning us into lemon market.
Maybe discrimination is a word that we can use.
I am not very qualified to use terms like that.
Phil, would you like to add to this on the questions of ethical concern?
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad Or sort of brought up the word discrimination. I mean, I'd come at it from, I say, a rights framework. Ethical concerns are more than just lawful concerns. Yeah, is it lawful to do something? If you want to talk about ethics, you need the basic framework, the underlying rule of law, if you like. But then you need, on top of that, you need another framework, for human rights, that's the human rights framework, and we get various forms of convention and national laws around that. But equally, in the corporate arena, there are corporate rights. Yeah, a simple illustration would be for a human being keeping things. They have a right to privacy. That's keeping something under their control. Well, corporations equally, they don't have privacy. They're not people, but they do have commercial confidentiality. Yeah, that's the corporate version of it. So you can see there's already quite a lot of law around. Ethics raises it to this other level and has to, like Anish says, has to attend to the wider, possibly even unintentional consequences, so that it's not just that we have to ask, is it just the collection? Yeah? Is it impacts, as Or says, that will people ultimately end up being discriminated against because of this? What else can these data collection tools be used for? Yeah, I mean, you actually need to get into the sort of nitty-gritty of how the thing that you are providing, the service that you are providing, might be used by those with malign intent. And frankly, for ethics, and I have had some exchanges with Or over social media over the years. He knows. I say it's not just the service that you're providing; it's the whole business. Yeah, if you're going to be claiming to be ethical, you have to look at the entire business. It's like your business model, all of these other things. And we come across this with, and this is not just Or, in my work, we come across companies like Palantir, that one part of the business is involved in intelligence and national security, and implicated in things like the ICE squads over in the United States. But at the same time, we here in the UK find that a different product of Palantir is being used at the heart of our NHS. Yeah, so we have to really be looking at things when we're talking about ethics very much in the round.
Yeah, I probably want to add something, if you don't mind, because it's like what he touched upon is super important. We call it in the game security analytics. So, some banks actually have very large platforms, and one of the big 4 banks in the UK, I built the platform, and I happen to have been to Palantir's offices multiple times because I used to be the global person responsible for this expertise for a very large, well-known consulting firm. I've had lots of conversations with them, and I see the use of technology and use of data. And one of the things I need to point out, and this is where the real threat happens, there is a very fine line between a value of somebody's life going from 1 to 0. What I mean by that is, like, if in a machine learning model in Palantir, with a brown skin man with a Muslim surname, the risk of actually being in the wrong place at the wrong time and Palantir's machine learning algorithm clustering me differently could be a question between life and death. And you can look this up by looking at some of the data that's been published. There was an Al Jazeera journalist who was actually wrongly classified. And the same thing, that is a public data set that we know what happened. And when you apply the NHS, not just NHS, they have a finance product, they have a healthcare product, they have a whole bunch of products. And each of the times, and this is kind of what I kind of allude to, like the ethics part, there's a data part ethics, and there's a machine learning part ethics, AI ethics, right? And having the balance right and having explainability and getting these people answer to the decision-making processes, this, I don't think, has reached a level, because like technology has gone really far. Post 9/11, US needed some solution to track down people, random people. And the thing to do was create a security analytics platform, look for anomalies, track people down. And they started gathering data, and the gathering of data took full steam, and all the roles were broken post 9/11. And what has happened is a whole bunch of models were created. The so-called arbitrage of doing economic things is a secondary thing. To people like me, the primary thing is life and security of average human around the world, right? So that is, I would completely agree with Phil. Super important, not discussed enough. I don't know what to say.
Or would you like to respond?
Yeah, so two things. First of all, I think I agree, but I think it's actually pretty easy to talk about companies like Palantir in relations to data ethics. But the fact is that most of the data that is being collected today is being collected by almost, every single company in the world, even a one-man show that is doing a project, for sure, bigger corporations that are doing it in mass scale. So that's the reality, and this is where the majority of the online data is being collected by almost everyone. And I think that, again, it's easy to talk about specific use cases because everyone knows, and it's easier to distinguish between right and wrong and good or bad and ethical and unethical. But I think that that's a smaller problem, actually. And the second thing is that, and Phil, I just by thinking back on our first communications, like a couple of years ago, I think it's coming back to transparency. So it didn't start well between us, right? We have our thoughts about each other, but then, it went really well afterwards because no one hide anything. It's just transparent communication. Every question is being answered with screenshots and even, I think, diff of the source code or something like that. So it's easy to understand what's ethical, what's not ethical, how things should be and shouldn't be if it's transparent. So maybe this is where the problem also starts, when you ask a question and you don't get an immediate answer, because and that's a question mark, big question mark. Why shouldn't someone answer if it's ethical? No.
But very much so. And transparency is, I think, one of the key aspects here. And you're right that Palantir is too easy an example. I was using it, I think, partially also because of the mitigations. It is in the nature of intelligence and national security work that the platform that they have built, while it is not public, very definitely not public, is, in my experience, one of the most heavily audited systems for handling data. And that's why, actually, when the NHS was in a bind in the pandemic, they may have reached for this platform. One of the reasons is that it is heavily audited, and so you can provide evidence of that you've been following, complying with data protection rules and any other rules that apply. So I think it's a combination of certainly transparency. Frankly, if any company or whatever is not being transparent, they may not be doing anything wrong, but they leave things open to doubt. So that's absolutely fundamental. I think there needs to be, a comprehensive and available audit. But we have to appreciate, like I say, people have privacy, companies have commercial confidentiality. That's not always going to be openly public stuff, but it must be there. But they also must be able to evidence that they are proactively monitoring, considering, and have taken steps to prevent those things which could obviously be done with their platform from being done. And that, I think, comes back to where we're back into sort of maybe Luminati territory. Is like, what is it that people can and can't do using the platform, using the endpoints and what have you, and to what extent and how do you actually, ensure that and can take steps if someone is doing something bad or wrong or forbidden. The difference there, things that you say you can't do, that's easy. You say you can't do this, monitor for it, and fine. Add good, bad, this starts to become, a sort of value judgment, and I agree. Sometimes those value judgments can be difficult.
Can I add something if it's okay? So I wanted to really point out something just to be clear, so the larger picture is all understood. I've been involved in this so-called game from really early on. So I am one of the idiots who was involved in writing Cloud Security Alliance Guide, the Cloud Bias Decision Guide, sat on the ISO committee. So the cloud is one of the very, 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 very interesting paradigms that really shifted the needle. Essentially, this is all an economic game, okay? I can actually break it up in pieces for you. And irrespective of how we see this, and there are certain examples, as Or pointed out and Phil pointed out, which stands out, and those have significant impact. Okay, let's take the case of let me explain the economic case, and let me take 2 cases and explain why the big cases really are the it's a tip of the iceberg phenomenon, but those really move the needle. The part of the reason why the world is where we are, part of the reason that 500,000 people died in the US and 100,000 people died in the UK, I will lay it down on the floor of Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. Okay, and why again is the argument I was describing. 10 years ago, not 15 years ago. So I first met Andrew Jassy, the guy who's going to take over Amazon soon, in a pub in London. I know this is never going to be a chance that's going to happen in next anytime, right? So we had a conversation. So I was one of the very, very early users of cloud, and cloud had nothing, just like an SSH. Essentially, you can just log in, right? And I was explaining to him what it is, where it might go. The thing that you need to understand at that point in time, machine learning, typically speaking, is a large matrix operation. Okay, you do multiplications of matrices, loose way speaking, and you can parallelize it. So essentially, what that means is, like, if you have a very large number, you can actually break that into smaller numbers and give it to, like, I have a very large number, I can give it to all 4 of us, and like we can divide it and put it back in. And this also reduced the cost of doing things, right? The cost became smaller and smaller, and then it became economically viable. The economic viability of actually doing machine learning is the flipping point, or the tipping point, right? And the value of storing data. Again, one of the things we need to understand is, like, the ability to store data hasn't really grown exponentially. It has been a linear increase. So I wouldn't be really worried that much about every endpoint being able to store data. They can't physically do that. So, I would be more worried about this bigger things, which actually have significant impact on humanity, that's alive right now and going to come in the future because of some set of arbitrary decisions made on some set of data with no explainability, no responsibility, and no audit.
So, or would you like to add something to this specifically, or we can?
I just think that there are ways to at least start handling ethics in data collection. The first thing, what we're doing right now is a good example, just talking about it and making sure that everyone understands that there is an issue, but this issue can be solved. But the more fundamental thing that I think that, at least from my point of view, is just the understanding is that there will be mistakes, there will be bad decisions that will take place by completely 100% ethical players. It just comes again to being open to feedback and understanding that what we're doing is new. So data is not new, privacy is not new, but the processes of collecting the data as the data source is just growing every day, they are fairly new. And the infrastructure for having everything going on in an ethical manner is still not done. It's haven't even started in the data collection industry, I think. So just having these open conversations, getting feedback, being transparent, opening everything as possible is probably the only approach that we can actually take, because we don't really know anything right now.
To a more practical question, or how do you maximize advantages and mitigate the misuse in your work?
Sure.
Sorry, I just saw that Anish wanted to add something.
Yeah, I was just about to add something. It's a very important thing. The reason I wanted to say this is, like, everybody has a notion that things are free. There is absolutely no thing as free lunch. And second law of thermodynamics implies you can't do certain things. So, thinking about data, and we need to think about compute as a thermodynamic process. So we really need to be realistic. We really need to understand that, privacy doesn't come free, enforcement doesn't come free, audit doesn't come free. So, we need, life of humanity as such is about constraining or better optimization of resources to get the best we can get. So, that, constraint optimization problem is a meta problem in multiple levels. And we always should be thinking about it. Like we do it every day in our lives. The same applies to data, same applies to machine learning, same applies to ethical machine learning, privacy preserving machine learning, auditing, everything. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Or considering that what Anish said, and to more practical aspects, how do you maximize advantages and mitigate the misuse, and how do you adhere to certain rules, and what have you dealt with before and how you addressed it? Because I think that would be a good point to make here in the discussion as we're talking about bigger issues and bring it to a practical aspect.
Sure, I'll have to answer that from the most practical point of view I can. We're doing a lot, I think, so I'll try to just pick a few, and then I can also add more afterwards or answer questions. So I think that, again, when it's clear that you just need to be able to communicate about anything, the most practical thing that we've implemented within the company in 2015, just after we launched the product and realized that there's a problem, is just not allowing access to the platform before we understand what the use case is. Now, our understanding of data collection use case back then is completely far from today, and I'm sure that today it's going to look like something completely else. If looking back at it in 5 years from now, I see Anish, I understand you agree. I'm the first one to say that, okay? But still, it's better than nothing. And for example, if you have this understanding that you don't really know, yeah, you try, but you don't really know, then it's easier to get the second decision, which is adding another layer. Another layer, for example, again, just from my personal experience, is adding full-time employees that will manually monitor the operation. Now, that's not scalable. So the next thing we did is to build a really impressive and comprehensive monitoring system, which I'm sure that, again, looking at the monitoring system 5 years from now, it will look completely different. We'll say, oh, man, how we forgot to do that, which is fine because, again, you have the understanding that no one really knows anything because it's all new. So do the best that you can, but always get the feedback. As this very quick and short feedback loop, you have to be completely honest with yourself, and the whole team must be completely honest about everything, because yeah, you'll do some things that are not exactly how it should be implemented, but if you realize that, it's easy to fix and to improve.
I mean, I have a little bit of a feeling here, a bit of a kickback or pushback from what we do. We work a lot in health, obviously, and research. Yeah, and all's correct. You have to, if you're in a rapidly evolving area of the industry, you're going to have to evolve what you do. That's not to say that there aren't actually really well-established models and principles of how you approach the problem. Yeah, there is research ethics, and by and large, there are ways of doing that. And there are certainly medical research ethics, which are probably, if you like, the gold standard. And it's that area in which MedConfidential primarily sort of works around health and care data. So I would say, yes, you're going through an iterative process, but there are examples and there are things that you can draw in from other sectors. So, for example, when you say, okay, we've got a bunch of people we're offering a service to, and we want to understand their use case. Yeah. If I were to translate that across into the research arena or the health research arena, that would be literally, applying for some data. Okay, you're applying for the ability to get data, but it's roughly the same principle. And that being done, if it's being done ethically, can be done transparently. Yeah. Those who are seeking to use data for an ethical, reasonable purpose, should have no reason not to be able to have that purpose published. Yeah. And then again, that sort of, you can see how, while you're talking about the sort of management of how you grow, Luminati's particular offer in this space, I think it's really important that you actually draw on, processes that we have been using for decades now around data, and see if you can get as close to them, a commercial equivalent of that, as soon as possible. there are other things as well. I mean, there's things about, and this is I have a crude understanding maybe of your network, your platform, but my understanding is that essentially, an SDK is used by or embedded in other software, and that provides the endpoints on your network. Yeah. So again, historically, if the software in which your SDK was, or the way in which you've got your endpoints was something that was, is now a bit frowned on, it was, considered malware or something like that, that would be something which would be picked up by a research ethics committee, and they'd be saying, well, hang on a minute, we can't be doing that. We can't be doing that. So it takes into account the history of, the process as well as what data is being looked for, or sought, and then it also looks at the outputs. And frankly, if what is happening is, this sort of data collection is going on, and as Or has characterized it, some of this data is being, it's on the web, but maybe hidden behind, I don't know, logins or captures or what have you, and you're taking measures to get past those. Well, if that's happening, then on the one hand, the company, corporation, site, or whatever that's put those measures in place did it for a reason. If that's been overcome and the resulting data and insights and everything from it is not public, then, well, that's just essentially a fight between two corporations.
Right.
There's no public benefit at all. Someone is benefiting from having scraped some data from somewhere else, and where is everyone else getting a benefit? So,
but actually,
again, it's looking in the round. Actually,
just when you talk about specifics, it's even easier to determine what's right and wrong, because, for example, I don't think that passing a login is fine. I mean, we won't do that, because is that actually public information? I'm not sure anymore. So, but it's becoming easier to determine when you understand and everything is transparent. Yeah, Anish, sorry.
I was about to say something. It's an obvious thing to say. So it's like, if you look at Europe, if you look at UK, and Phil actually gave a very good example. I spent a year in 2007 for Connection for Health writing information governance for NHS in that sense. So as an idiot who went to med school and then did research in privacy, I can see, both sides of the equation. And the real thing which I think really differentiates the healthcare space is not just that. It's the fact that most regulators really understand the value clearly. And, the penalty for breaching is very clearly understood. But if you think about the normal data problem, it's a real problem. What is essentially happening is a legal arbitrage. And this is kind of how I describe this. You need to think about this in an economic sense. We need to disincentivize people from using economic game, essentially an algorithmic game theory against the society to extract value. So this should be flipped. And what we should do is, like, if you do that, we're going to tax you. So the taxes on you will be so high, it makes no sense for you to do this kind of information arbitrage on the society. That's what I think we should be thinking about.
I agree. And I just want to add one more thing. Again, showing how important it is to talk about specific things. Because, Phil, what you said, I totally agree. So SDK, easy, right? You don't need to reinvent anything. You just need to use the common practices. So you know what? Don't invent a new name for the SDK package. Just give it your company name so everyone can understand who it belongs to. That's an ethical way to write an SDK. However, when we're talking about a more broader data collection process of publicly available data, okay, again, I'm trying to put it in a specific point of view, then it's, for us at least, it was something new, and we're not coming from the health industry, for example, and it's hard to even transfer what was learned there to a new industry. So in this example, we just paid for external auditors to examine us and others and to give us an advice. That's also something practical that we've been doing once we realized, again, all about honesty and transparency, once we realized that we don't know. So we just paid an external auditor to tell us how it should be working. And sometimes it's right. Sometimes you can just take a few of the things because, again, it's a new industry, so you need to adjust it. But it's all coming back to just looking straight ahead into the problem, and sometimes saying, damn, I'm not sure. Let's ask someone else.
Yeah, and I think it's also looking not just narrowly at the problem, encouraging you back to that first bit, and I think you are aware of this. It's there are effects of data collection at a technical level that are inevitable from a platform of your size. Yeah, the potential for this thing to flood, the request of the data to flood someone's system, this to appear like a DDoS attack or what have you. When you have these things at scale, if people haven't got mitigations or what have you, they can experience data collection as an attack. It's not even about the data. It's not even about whatever. It's just the pure sort of, the technical flows of data and what have you. And so, it's just encouraging you and others, in similar situations to try to think first in the broadest possible way. Yeah. The analogy I use when looking at large government or public sector systems is that I don't believe I have bottomed out even what's called a data protection impact assessment until I have worked out how that system will kill someone. Yeah, even health systems that are designed to provide care services, can kill people or be weaponized to hurt people. And so it's having to have that broad view while being, as you say, very practical and specific, and trying to find the ways to actually, build things, correctly, so that you end up, moving into the more positive sort of direction.
I love this. How can this kill a person test? I think that this is an amazing test to perform.
So I was just about to add one small bit. In my past life, I've been looking at protocols, and I've broken IPsec and other ones. So audit generally is not a great indicator. So when I attacked it, and then my PhD mate attacked and broke both IPsec and SSL for padding. So audit gives us some constraints. We need to think a bit beyond that in that sense. And I think we need to think probably in systems in that sense. So, and kind of do the analysis is like what NASA does for the complex system analysis for failure modes, right? We need to understand that in that sense. So in a healthcare setting, okay, what happens if, because literally what is happening is a supply chain problem. So Siemens supplies some device to somebody else, and somebody else then uses Siemens devices data to do something else. And it is pretty easy to actually have a problem in the supply chain that actually causes deaths of a lot of people. And I'm reasonably certain it happens with a very high probability, because if you look at the total lines of number of code, or you would probably back me up with real raw data, that if you write 1K line of code, the probability that a bug that is there is, we know the bound. And however much we do auditing, we do everything, right? Bugs are going to be found. And what that implies is productive probabilities. When you have complex systems, this risk propagates through the system. And when you get to the bedside of the patient, it is becoming a reasonably large number. And we don't know is what Phil is kind of alluding to us. And I would really like to know, is there any chance in hell that we would actually have at least a bound of what it is? Given the complexity of things are increasing, we know for a fact that this risk is increasing. Is there anything that you can think of that we could actually use to actually have a better idea of what this risk looks like?
Yes, absolutely. And I've been working on this for some years, and it's being used in, I know, cybersecurity. Think about the people. Yes, everything gets complicated. The systems get ever more complicated. But if you look at this through the lens of the people that will be involved in it, you have the person whose site is being collected from. You have the person whose device is being used to collect that data. You have, the person who is coming to you asking for that data, and you have their customers. Yeah. And if you think of it in terms of the people, it is, a a lot easier to tease out from each of those personae or roles or positions what the view of the system is. If you try mapping the system, the complexity will defeat you almost every time. Whereas if you look at this from the perspective of people, and that drags in, what it helpfully does is drag in things like the legal stuff that we talked about, data protection law, human rights law, even commercial law when you're talking about a company relationship. And so I would encourage people not to think that this is too complex. It really isn't. It's hard work, and it's taken us years to be able to gain enough of a grasp of the complexity of the NHS and other public sector systems. But it is absolutely doable when you think of it in terms of the people and the effects in their lives, positive and negative.
I'm really sorry. I think my internet got cut down and I'm back. So unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left. So I would like to just ask one more question. And to wrap it up, what have you learned from this discussion? What are the key takeaways for you? Anish, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely, three different perspectives of the same problem in one way of thinking. It's like, it would remind me of blind men going and seeing an elephant. So, I recognize at least, elephant is not just a cylinder. It does have flat surfaces and leaf-like surfaces. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Phil, what about you?
I think I've learnt a great deal from hearing Anish and Or talking about things from their perspective. I'm still sort of learning about, I think, what the range of questions and challenges are. I work across government systems and health systems and things like that, and it seems to me that there's something different thrown up in relation to ethics when you are talking about commercial confidentiality and secrecy and transparency versus human privacy and transparency. So the words, if you like, are roughly similar. But once we burrowed down beyond that sort of high level stuff, it struck me, and I will certainly go away and think about this some more, that there are some very different challenges in this space. And as I think I've said earlier, it's like I think we can draw on analogies from other areas, and we should to try and tackle these problems. But I think that's my learning from this is that real distinction.
Or
yeah, so I couldn't agree more, Phil. I mean, what I'm taking from this discussion is that we all of us have our daily routine, which is super busy, and we're like in a tunnel vision or the things that we care about, and it looks like that's the way to go. But if you look right or left or in the squares here, if we're literally, if I look up and down in the squares, there's a whole new perspective that even if it's not the same, maybe you should just take inspiration from what these people have been doing for years, even if you're in completely different areas. I mean, eventually the goal is the same. Ethics, it's a big word. We won't crack it down right here, or probably won't crack it down ever. But at least there is willingness from many people in different industries to talk about it. So you should probably listen. I'm talking about myself. We should probably listen to people who already done that, even if it's in completely other industries.
I think that was a really great and fascinating discussion. Or Phil, Anish, thank you so much.
For sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.